which is our way of introducing you to this evening's guest, Sri M.P. Pandit from Pondicherry, from the Aurobindo ashram, who is visiting the United States and served as the personal secretary to the mother for more than 20 years, has written numerous books on Aurobindo's philosophy and on Indian philosophy, is a scholar and a yogin. And we're going to be talking this evening about Aurobindo's philosophy. Perhaps we'll touch on Auroville, the New Age global community being built outside of Pondicherry. Sri Pandit, it's nice to have you with us.
Thank you.
Perhaps a good way to begin would be to ask you what brought you to the United States. You've spent literally most of your life living in the ashram in India, and just recently you came to the United States. So what brought you here to this country?
Well, I really came to learn and to share with friends in this country what we have been doing in our part of the world and what we hope to do in Auroville, the planetary city that we have started building in Pondicherry. It was suggested to us by some friends in this country that it would be useful for someone in a place like our ashram who has stayed and practiced yoga directly under the guidance of Sri Aurobindo and the mother. If such a person could come and talk to friends who are interested in this new philosophy of perfection of life, perfect man in a perfect society, that could carry conviction to many seekers in this land who are looking for some such positive philosophy of life. And I thought it was time that I responded to these suggestions. You are right. I spent 38 years of my life in Sri Aurobindo ashram in Pondicherry, the spiritual community that was founded over 50 years ago.
So you came to this country not as a teacher, but as someone who wanted to learn what was happening here and to share some of your own ideas about what's happening there and see if a synthesis could emerge from that?
Exactly. I don't presume to be a teacher because I follow Sri Aurobindo's tradition, which holds that the real teacher is in the heart of each man, and it is the proper business of those who are awake, who are enlightened, to help others to awaken the inner teacher in themselves. And it is just to learn, to communicate, to cast my net wide and synthesize in myself the values that are being promoted, developed and established in this country, that I am here for the last 2 months.
What have you learned since you've been here?
Well, that's a very interesting question because, I have learned a lot. But the foremost thing I would say is that this country has great promise. We in the East are always fed with stories, both by your news media and ours, that America is a typical Western country lost in the splendors of material civilization and has no ear to spiritual truths. I was even told that I would find nobody to listen to me, and it was an idle waste of time. But believe me, when I came here, I found the people very earnest. All people here work very hard. A thing which struck me on the very first day, the material affluence that is so evident, that struck me indeed. But also the fact that everyone in this country works hard and very hard, more than in any other country that I have seen. And I feel that the Americans richly deserve the material prosperity that they have. But as I started meeting young people, meeting communities, groups, I found that behind this glittering exterior, a new mind was slowly forming. It is halfway. There is a realization in many of the young people here that something is lacking in the life that they live, and they are looking for some alternative life patterns by which they could fill the lacunae, and they are alert. When we speak to them of other experiments, they ask very searching questions, and they show a readiness to try out those patterns of life. This sincerity to commit oneself and plunge into these adventures of consciousness, as I would call, is something unique in this country. Not only the youngsters, but even the middle-aged group, there are many who are willing to try, and they have no regrets to give up the values of their existing civilization. When I assured them that it is not necessary at all to devalue their present ways of life, their present values, they were very much interested. They asked me, is it not necessary to eliminate technology from any new scheme of life? I had to point out that far from being undesirable, technology is a must, because technology is a product of the evolution of human consciousness, and it has much more to give to mankind. We have to develop the right consciousness to promote and direct technology, and this consciousness can be attained by certain self-disciplines. When I told this to your young people, they were attracted and they wanted to know more details about experiments in our ashram and in Aurobindo, where we are trying out a new way of life based upon these principles. This promise of a new spiritual renaissance of the world, possibly starting in this country, is the first great impression that has formed on my mind.
Some of our listeners may not be aware or too knowledgeable about the philosophy of Sri Aurobindo. And I can't think of anyone better qualified to recognizing that Sri Aurobindo's philosophy is quite broad and vast. With your knowledge and experience, I can't think of anyone more qualified to perhaps present a very simple and complete synthesis of what Aurobindo's philosophy was about. Perhaps you could share that with us.
Yes, that's very relevant. Sri Aurobindo's is a positive philosophy which accepts the world as a necessary part of one's life and looks upon life as a growing evolution, a spiritual evolution of consciousness. Nature is busy developing grades and levels of consciousness, and man is at present the crown of evolutionary nature's labors. He is destined to evolve into something more than man, develop the faculties and the capacities which he has half developed so far. And Sri Aurobindo conceives that the real object of life for man is not salvation, as used to be preached by other religious and spiritual traditions so long, but perfection of life. A perfect life, a perfect man in a perfect society. He not only presents a philosophy of the possibility of perfection of life in terms of evolution of consciousness, leading to the opening up of a new grade of consciousness called the truth faculty, the truth consciousness above the mind. But he also studies the development of human society right from the beginnings and proves that we are on the verge of entering into what he calls the spiritual age, when it is not the mental consciousness that is going to rule, but a spiritual consciousness. This relating of individual perfection with the development of the collectivity of which the individual is a member is a special feature of Sri Aurobindo's approach. He also envisages that all the nations of the world are slowly being drawn together by the pressures of a new consciousness that is emerging on earth, and the ideal of human unity is coming nearer and nearer realization. And this philosophy of his, presenting the prospect of a divine life for man, which exceeds the formulations of religions, past spiritual traditions, ideologies, embracing the whole of humanity in its vision, is a distinct contribution by Sri Aurobindo. He presented it some 60 years ago, and it has had a profound effect on the thinking of the higher mind of humanity. Many thinkers and seers have begun to think in the same line, and nobody today thinks that withdrawal from the world, retreat from life, is the ideal solution to the problems of life. That is Sri Aurobindo's positive philosophy of the fulfillment of man in this world here on earth, not elsewhere into a heaven or a paradise beyond.
We're talking with Sri Pandit of the Aurobindo Ashram in Pondicherry, India. I think it's interesting to look at Sri Aurobindo as not just a philosopher, but someone who had been a scholar and had been very politically active. Was really a radical in his time, and we've spent a lot of time on this program talking about the relationship of personal change and social change, political change, and some of our listeners may not be aware of Sri Aurobindo's background before he actually went into his own spiritual search and his spiritual life. I think that's an interesting point. Do you have any comment on that?
Oh yes, it will be interesting to know in brief about Sri Aurobindo's background, because Sri Aurobindo himself, once said that his real life is not on the surface for man to see. He was such a multiple personality, as they call it, that it is difficult to say who he was. When somebody described, the former president of Indian Union, Dr. Radhakrishnan, of which you know, he once described Sri Aurobindo as a philosopher. Sri Aurobindo vehemently disclaimed, saying that he was not a philosopher at all, but he was a poet and a patriot. He said he had certain spiritual realizations, and when he stated them in terms of the intellect, for the mind of humanity to follow and understand and accept it or not, that for the extension of the forces of peace, containment of the forces of violence. And this is one of the most remarkable developments of the decade that is just ending. Unless man shifts his center of consciousness from his ego level to the soul level, there can't be a permanent solution to the problems of life. And spiritual movements, a spiritual renaissance aims precisely to effect this inner revolution. One of your own thinkers, I think it was Ernest Hemingway, spoke of one-man revolution. That has appealed to me very much. Each one of us who believes in these higher values, he has to work out a revolution in himself. A few individuals everywhere who believe in this one-man revolution, they have to get together. Not always on the physical level, but at least on the mental to start with, and form small groups which will focus attention on these problems, the necessity of transcending the old ways of thinking and living, and effect a revolution in their own individual lives and in their small group lives. There is what Sri Aurobindo calls a group consciousness. Just as each individual has a consciousness, similarly each group of people has a consciousness of its own. And when the group develops and forms into a nation, that consciousness develops into what is called nation soul. There is a direct correspondence between the individual soul and the nation soul, the individual consciousness and the group consciousness. Nature has evolved the individual up to his optimum. Now, the individuals have to cooperate in developing the corporate consciousness, and the formation of small communities, unities,
of a few people everywhere, trying out the values in which they believe. That is the way for the Renaissance to spread. And I am very happy to see from the literature on your table that this new dimensions is aware of this problem, and they are doing their best to coordinate the activities of these several communities and forge a sense of oneness and solidarity among all these groups. I have felt a great need of this kind of coordination, making each group aware of the existence of other groups so that each one can learn from the others. And I would suggest that the scope of the new dimensions here be extended to cover other countries and eventually the whole world.
Hear, 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 hear. Sri Pandit, you mentioned moving from the ego level to the soul level, and perhaps you could be a little more specific as to what that actually means.
Yes. Man, as he functions now normally, he goes on reacting to situations. He doesn't act. Each life situation provokes him into certain reactions. He lives a mechanical life. He has no control over what he does. And to the extent that he is conscious, he is governed by his selfish interests organized around his ego self, or what is called the desire self, which is paramount, which is supreme, for which he has no hesitation in sacrificing the interests of others. But today man is under pressure to change his way of life. He cannot function on this old basis anymore. He realizes his limitations. The sufferings and the crisis, they are forcing him to awake, to think. And as has been nicely put, he has, instead of reacting to things, he has to learn to respond to things. Response, not reaction. That means he has to become more conscious, more awake. He has to turn inward, become conscious of more areas of consciousness and being which are lying untapped. And as he turns inward, his attention is directed inward. He discovers the truer springs of life, springs of thought, springs of feelings. And the deeper he goes towards what are called the soul levels, he finds the springs of liberating powers like love, harmony, kindness, benevolence, instead of the present dividing qualities, human faculties like anger, hostility, suspicion, vengeance, selfishness. It is the opposite qualities of comprehension, kindness, love. These begin to manifest in his life. This is what is called shifting of the center of consciousness from the ego level to the soul level. In the process, man finds the true center of his being. He becomes aware of the source of his consciousness, source of his life moment. And it is from there that he functions. And the next step that man has to do is to extend the range of his interests. Having found the true center in himself of his consciousness, he has to extend his consciousness. The bane of spirituality all over the world till today is it has been too vertical. The time has come when we have to have a horizontal spirituality. Vertical spirituality has to be replaced by horizontal spirituality. Instead of being concerned with my own salvation, my own liberation, my own paradise, I should extend my interest, share my consciousness, share my enlightenment, reach out to others, universalize myself or cosmicize myself. This is another dimension of the spiritual renaissance of which I speak. A horizontal spirituality, meaning thereby that man widens himself and embraces more and more of the universe in his mind, in his heart, in his life range. This is the change that man has to effect in himself before he opens up the other levels of his being above his mind and invokes in his life powers of consciousness that arrive at knowledge swiftly, unerringly, more rapidly than the thought intellect with which he functions today.
We have some callers that are holding on the line. Our phone number here is 864-2051. Let's take a phone call.
Yes.
Hello, you're on the air.
Good evening. Good evening. I have a couple of questions concerning homosexuality. I have heard several versions of several answers. One being it's definitely wrong, and anybody who indulges in that is that way should be castigated or stoned or whatever. Others have said it is part of a growing process and may not necessarily be wrong for the moment. And I'm just wondering what comment you gentlemen would have to make concerning that. Is right or wrong, or is it depends on the situation, or how does that usually go?
Sri Pandit?
Oh yes, I would at once say unhesitatingly that from a spiritual point of view, from the point of view of consciousness, homosexuality is neither right nor wrong.
I paused for a moment because I wanted to digest what you have just said. Would you like to comment further about this? I have known people who have had thoughts along those lines, and also who have engaged in those practices, who have felt very guilty about it, and I have spoken with other people who have said, well, this is the way I am right now, and I do not feel bad about it. And would you?
There is no necessity at all.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand you. Please repeat that.
There is no necessity at all to feel guilty about it. If that is the demand of nature in some persons, well, there it is. This feeling of wrong, this feeling of guilt is a vestige of old, decaying conventions of old world moralities. They have no relevance today.
That is one of the questions I was thinking about. Where does the guilt feeling come from to begin with? And the question also has arisen in my mind. The Old Testament in Leviticus, I think it's chapter 19, but at any rate, there's a statement in there which says something to the effect that if a man lies with a man as he would with a woman, that is an abomination. Now, perhaps there is something which I am not understanding properly there.
That is one of the many statements in the old scriptures which reflect more the temper of that age than a revealed wisdom. Each scripture has what is called its temporary local element and a permanent element. Statements like those which you quoted are obviously related to the social conditions and norms of the times in which the scripture was written or put down. They cannot presume to govern humanity for all time. They have become irrelevant.
Thank you for your call. We have to move on because we have other callers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Hello, you're on the air.
Yes, I'd like to ask Sri Pandit about what his views are on this population explosion the world's experiencing. What's going to happen with that?
Well, the only way to deal with population explosion, is first to satisfy ourselves that we are utilizing the available resources in the best possible manner. After satisfying ourselves on that point, if we need to limit the population, we have to practice self-control. If self-control is not possible or practical, birth control. The use of artificial methods where natural methods fail is perfectly legitimate in the progress of mankind.
Well, the population seems to be growing at a much faster rate than people seem to be wanting to do anything about birth control, though. So, what do you think is going to happen there?
Are you talking about any specific area of the world?
Well, China, India, mostly the Far East.
There, you see, I myself come from the East, and we have found that the problem is one of raising the economic standards of the people. And we have found that wherever we have succeeded in raising the standards, the birth rate falls automatically. So it is a question of building up their economic well-being, and all enlightened governments in Asia today are trying their best to educate the people, raise their standards, and the population problem will be solved automatically. There are also energetic measures for promoting voluntary limitation of families. This movement also is afoot. It is the real problem, perhaps you did not articulate it, is some religions like Islam, Christianity, particularly the Catholics, they frown upon the use of artificial methods to prevent births. Well, we have to get over it. Those religious sanctions have no value today.
Okay, thank you for your call.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Hello, you're on the air.
Hello.
Hello, you're on the air.
Hello. I'd like to ask Mr. Pandit, what is his definition of truth? How would he define truth?
Truth. Truth?
Yes, how would you define truth?
Ah, yes, this is an old question, you know. But I'm not going to run away like Pontius Pilate, who asked the question.
No.
Well, I would say truth is what sustains a thing is the truth of that thing. Each form, each movement has a basic sustaining element in it. Because of that sustaining element it lives, and that is its truth. Man, for instance, what sustains him is a divine element in him, and that is his truth.
Yes. But when we look at people like Socrates or Jesus,
Yes.
we realize that, and Nietzsche also said this, that truth is always on the side of the more difficult. You know, how can a possibly a spiritually enlightened man live in the world at all? Dostoevsky said this more than once. It would be practically an impossibility for men to, well, in his book The Idiot, you know, that it would be impossible for such a man to live in the world if he was truly enlightened, if he truly had found the truth. He would be more inclined to be living in a corner than going out and preaching truth. Truth to most philosophers is a very difficult thing.
On the other hand, a man who has found a truth in himself.
Yes, that's true, but it's a very lonely truth, isn't it, Mr. Pandit?
Please, he will be more understanding of the positions of others. That what is truth to him is not yet a truth to others. He will be more charitable, more indulgent, more understanding, and he will be one who will be very easy to live with. It is when we make...
True, but couldn't he also be more misunderstood by his fellow men?
Yes, that is possibility is there, and it has happened very often.
Yes.
But for him, he doesn't mind it. He pays the price willingly and joyfully.
Yes, because he has no fear.
Yes.
Exactly?
Yes.
Yes. Well, that's what I wanted to ask you.
Yes.
That's all, really.
It's a very pointed question and a significant question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pandit. Thank you.
Thank you for calling.
Thank you.
We're talking with Sri Pandit of the Aurobindo Ashram, Pondicherry, India. This is New Dimensions, and we'll be continuing in just a minute.